Before we get started, Talk Music Talk has a newsletter, a weekly email featuring the current week's guests, plus what past guests are up to. Also, I'll tell you about shows I've attended and new music that I like. To sign up, head on over to talkmusictalk.com, click on the link, subscribe to newsletter, and you are all set. That's talkmusictalk.com. And now for today's episode. Hello there, my friend. Welcome to episode 135 of Talk Music Talk with Boyce. I am Boyce. This is my podcast you are checking out. For the first-time listener, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people who are connected to music from different genres and backgrounds, emerging and established musicians, singers, singer-songwriters, not just performers, but also people like music therapists and music journalists. And on episode 135, I had the pleasure of speaking to Mary Halvorson. She is a band leader, a composer, a jazz guitarist based in Brooklyn, originally from Boston. And last year, she released the critically acclaimed album, Away With You, featuring her octet. Away With You was celebrated by everyone, including the New York Times music critic, Nate Chinen, who placed it number one on his best albums of 2016. Mary started playing guitar at age 11, inspired by the great Jimi Hendrix. She talks about that influence. She talks about what Jimi Hendrix means to her. She also goes into her musical background. We talk about improvisation, the recording process. We discuss performing live and how it can be affected by the audience or the venue itself. And we also talk about Away With You and her forthcoming projects. After the conversation, this great conversation, you will hear the title track, Away With You. Before we get to that, this episode with Mary is one of 3 consecutive jazz interviews, 134 with Josiah Woodson and 136 with Amir ElSafar. So check out both of those. I will put the links in the show notes. But here it is, without further ado, episode 135 with Mary Halvorson. Enjoy. You have the octet, right? Then there's solo, duo, trio, septet.
Septet and a quintet in there somewhere and a quartet.
Okay. What do you get from all these different permutations?
Well, I guess I've always enjoyed working in a lot of different bands. I've never had the goal to only have one band that I work with all the time. So I think for me, having all these different groups keeps life interesting. Yeah. And I also have been gradually expanding my group. So I started with a trio, then I added 2 people to make a quintet, then I made a septet and octet, and I'm done. Okay. I'm not going to add any more.
You're not orchestra next?
Yeah, I think, I don't think so. At least not now.
So when you keep adding, is it like, okay, I would like to hear what this instrument sounds like to what I'm doing?
I think, part of it is I feel like I like adding to a group that's already existing because it feels like you have a strong foundation with a group of people that already play together and have a sound as a group and that I'm comfortable writing for. So then adding people feels like something that allows for you to expand orchestrational possibilities and colors and things like that. Okay. So I've been enjoying doing that kind of gradually, making it a larger group without feeling like it's a completely new project because the same people have been there all along.
And how does that change your composition when you add something new to it?
Well, I guess I've been thinking more orchestrationally, and the last person I added was a pedal steel guitarist. Yeah. So for me, that presented all kinds of challenges because the instrument is crazy. I fell in love with the instrument and wanted to write for it, and specifically for Susan Alcorn, who's incredible. Yeah. But for me, that presented an interesting orchestrational challenge because it wasn't like adding another horn to a group of horns already. It's an instrument that goes basically as low as an upright bass and higher than a trumpet. And so it has this almost shape-shifting quality where it really could be a part of the horn section. It could be playing some lines with me on guitar. Yeah. It could be doubling a bass line. It could be completely in its own zone. So it almost felt like adding many instruments, even though I was just adding one. So that was the most recent challenge. But I enjoy trying to orchestrate things in different ways and try to bring out the qualities of certain instruments and players.
And what do you like? Would you be doing an orchestra? Is that something?
Well, I don't usually think more than one project ahead. So I'm not saying I never would do an orchestra, but it's not where my brain is at the moment. So I kind of think, okay, what am I doing this year? And who knows, maybe I would be doing an orchestra at some point.
Okay. And for the guitar for yourself, when did you start playing guitar?
Probably around 11.
And what sparked that?
Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
I mean, I had music before then because I played violin. Maybe in second grade or something, all my friends were playing Suzuki violin, so I picked that up. Did
you enjoy that?
Not really. I might have for a minute, but I think I enjoyed music. I think the violin wasn't the right fit for me. And I never felt that I was that good at it. I didn't really like playing in orchestras. So it just wasn't really sticking. And then, you get into middle school and discover rock and roll, and violin suddenly didn't seem like the most relevant option for me at the time.
Unless it was Jethro Tull, right?
Yeah, right.
And how did you get into Hendrix? How did you discover him?
I have no idea. Maybe some other kids at school were listening to him. I have no idea how I came to discover Jimi Hendrix, but I mean, he was probably just around. I feel like he's an interesting musician in that he's influenced several consecutive generations of guitar players. I'll talk to guitar players in their 60s that, were hearing him live when they were growing up. And I have students that are in their 20s that also started because of Hendrix. So it's interesting because I feel like he's widely loved and widely influential, probably more than a lot of other guitar players.
Because it's not just the guitar playing, but also the songwriting.
Yeah, everything. The songwriting, his approach is so unique and so powerful.
Was there a particular song or album that you really excited you?
Probably Axis Bold as Love. And it was also particular songs. I was really into Purple Haze and Hey Joe and Little Wing and The Wind Cries Mary. And so I was trying to learn those songs on guitar tablature books.
Okay. So what was it like asking your parents for a guitar?
I guess I must have. I think my aunt had an acoustic guitar somewhere in my mom's basement. So I had that. And then, I was trying to figure out these songs on my own. And at some point, I think they realized this was sticking. So I got my parents got me a black and white Stratocaster.
Okay, nice. And it was self-taught, or did you get lessons?
At first, and then maybe a couple years in, I started taking lessons.
Okay.
In high school, I started taking guitar lessons.
And were you writing? Did you start writing by then?
Not right away. I think I probably didn't start writing until maybe a couple years after that, maybe towards the end of high school. And in college, I was definitely writing music. Okay.
And were you you were going to be a musician? Did you know?
Oh, definitely was not going to be a musician.
Okay.
It's funny because it really didn't occur to me that as like a possibility. I guess that speaks to my practical nature.
Yeah. But I hear that a lot.
It didn't seem like a possibility. It seemed like saying, I want to be an astronaut, which I guess also is a possibility, but it seemed to me that out of reach.
Yeah.
I just enjoyed it. But I always thought I was going to study science.
Okay. That was your thing in school that you were into?
Yeah. I mean, I always kind of liked a lot of different stuff, but probably biology was the thing I was focusing on. So, and then, just gradually things shift.
Yeah. When did the shift happen?
In college.
Okay. So you went to school for biology?
Yeah. Well, I went to a liberal arts school. So I basically went thinking I'll study whatever, but guessing that I would probably focus on science. And the college that I went to, Wesleyan University, Anthony Braxton taught at. So in the first semester, I met Anthony Braxton, and that was around when the science got thrown out the window.
Okay. And what class was it that you took with him?
I think it was a couple, but basically he would teach several classes in the music department each semester, and some of them were ensemble classes. And the one I remember taking first was a large ensemble. He taught this every semester, and I took it basically every semester I was there.
Yeah.
It was a large ensemble class where you'd play his music. And then he also had a lecture class. I think around that time he was teaching the music of Sun Ra and Stockhausen.
Yeah.
So you'd listen to him talk and play music and then try to play his music. And I was just so taken with it. And also just really, it was so different than any other music I had played before. So just trying to wrap my head around it and understand it and read some of his writings. It was like learning a new language.
Okay. Because your interests have been mainly, I guess, rock and pop stuff?
And jazz. I was studying jazz in high school, jazz guitar. And so by the time I got to college, I was pretty into jazz. Probably is the main thing I was listening to at that point.
Is there, I mean, when you think of jazz, you definitely think of, horns, but maybe not necessarily guitar. Was that ever a consideration as you're doing jazz?
Well, actually, yeah, because I wasn't listening to that much jazz guitar. I was into jazz, but more, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. I was a little bit into Wes Montgomery for guitar, but actually I picked up alto saxophone in high school, partly because I was so into jazz, and I thought maybe I wanted to play the saxophone. But then I remember at a certain point I felt that I had to choose. I didn't feel like I had the time or capacity to focus on guitar and saxophone, so the saxophone lost.
So when you heard Anthony Braxton involved with him, did it immediately feel like a connection?
I mean, for me, something about Anthony clicked right away.
Yeah.
Just something about the excitement of it. And it wasn't only that, it was him as a teacher and just his energy and positivity and basically excitement about music.
Yeah.
He just got me really excited about music and about all kinds of music. He's one of the most open-minded musicians I know. So it really, for me, it just opened a lot of doors and got me really excited right away.
So it didn't seem like, the more experimental stuff didn't seem like odd to you? Or...
No, I think I had already kind of gotten there, again, gradually. And actually, the first time I heard Anthony Braxton was in high school because I had checked out Derek Bailey, and he had a duo record with Derek Bailey.
Okay.
So I was aware of it, and I was starting to check out some more experimental stuff. But then, through Anthony, I discovered the Art Ensemble of Chicago and the whole AACM movement and all kinds of things that I didn't know about before. Okay.
And so now you're throwing science out the window, right? And you're going to do the music, so you're now thinking, I could be a musician. Okay.
Sort of. I still wasn't sure, but at some point I was too deep in to turn around.
There's no plan B.
Yeah.
So what happened? You're studying throughout school, and what happens? How's the whole process of school at Wesleyan?
Well,
so you switched your major to music?
Yeah, at some point I did. And the thing about Wesleyan is you have to take lots of non-music classes, even if you're a music major. So I was taking all sorts of things. And even in my head, I went through a number of majors. I thought about psychology at one point. But I was basically just taking as much music as I could. And I took a year off in the middle of it and went to the New School, the jazz program in New York, to basically just to focus on technique and ear training and things like that. Because I had to take all these non-music classes at Wesleyan, it was really hard to focus on practicing. So I did that and was just checking out as much music as I could. I remember driving down to New York from Connecticut a couple times a week to go to the Knitting Factory and Tonic and just taking in as much as I could, really.
Were you doing any gigs?
Just around college.
Okay.
I had a couple different bands there, and we even played frat parties and things like that.
Was that jazz or more pop stuff?
It was probably what were we playing? We probably were playing jazz, and then also some maybe some stuff that was more rock or funk oriented.
Okay. So after you do the New School and you go back to Wesleyan, how are you different? How are you now as a player? How did that change you?
It was interesting because they were really about as opposite experiences as one could get. And I think doing both was good because it made me appreciate both experiences. I appreciated at Wesleyan, the music program was so focused on experimentation and creativity, really open. They have and all kinds of music programs. They had a Javanese gamelan and a big African drumming program and all kinds of things. And then at the new school, for me, it was very narrow. It was really just focusing on learning jazz guitar and studying that. And maybe what it taught me was that I enjoy both. I enjoy both things. I want to have focus in my life, but I also want to be able to explore.
Okay.
So I'm thankful for having both of those experiences in school.
Did you feel caught up, like when you went back after doing the new school?
I don't remember it being a hard transition back. I remember it being a hard transition going to the new school because suddenly I'm, 19, 20, living in New York City for the first time, just in this complete unknown world. But when I went back, I already felt like established there. So that didn't feel like a tough transition.
Okay. Where are you from originally?
Boston.
Okay. So that wasn't, I guess it was some transition to go from Boston to New York, or is it? I guess
it just felt like a little leap down the East Coast. Total East Coaster.
Was that your first time to New York?
When I went to the new school?
Yeah.
Well, I would go before I went there when I was a freshman and sophomore at Wesleyan. I would drive down quite often and hear music there, and I had friends there, and I'd probably been a couple times as a kid, going to the Statue of Liberty or something like that. But that was my first experience actually living there.
And fully immersed in it.
Yeah, exactly. Being fully immersed in that energy.
Okay. So you go back to Wesleyan, then you graduate. What are your plans then?
So then I moved to New York the day after I graduated. I really fell in love with New York.
Yeah.
Just with the music in particular, but also I love the city, the energy of the city. And I had a friend who was a grad student at Wesleyan who had a house in Clinton Hill and needed to sublet a room. So I had a place to go. So I sublet this room in Clinton Hill for a few months, and then got my own apartment a couple months later, got a full-time office job, and just started living here.
Okay. And you were doing the office job, and were you gigging then?
A little bit, kind of gradually. But, that's one of those things you look back on and thinking, how did I have the energy to do that? Because I would basically work 40 hours a week and come home, make a pot of coffee, and practice all night.
How far off are you from doing your first album recording?
Well, I guess I did a recording. My first recording as a leader I didn't do until 2008, I think, at which point I'd already been living in New York maybe 6 years. But I did a whole bunch of recordings collaboratively with friends, a few duo projects. I had a duo project with violist Jessica Pavone, who was basically the first person I met when I moved to New York, and my first friend, and we were playing a lot the first few years I lived in New York and recording and doing little gigs.
Okay. And the 2008 album, what formation was that?
That was my trio.
Trio, okay.
Yeah.
And what was the process of wanting to do your own project?
Well, at that point, I'd been doing, like I said, a bunch of collaborative projects and also side woman stuff. And I'd been playing, I guess at that point, I'd played quite a bit with the bassist Trevor Dunn in his trio Convulsant, which was a guitar, bass, drum trio. And I remember just really enjoying working in that format.
Yeah.
As a guitar player, playing in a guitar, bass, drum trio is just such a natural and great instrumentation. So I think at some point I was wanting to have a group of my own with that instrumentation and just see what that would be like to write for that group. So that's where that idea came from.
And what was like the focus of that first album theme? Was it just like the best of what you'd written so far?
I think for me it was really an experiment. It was just trying to take all kinds of ideas that I'd had from the beginning of my experiences with music and different things that I liked and trying to write some ideas for guitar, bass, and drums. And then as I got to know the band, it became easier to write for. You know, I started to be able to hear what a piece would sound like. You know, at first it felt more like stabbing in the dark. But then once you have done some gigs and know the sounds of the musicians and the instruments, it became a little bit easier, and I felt like I had a little more momentum with it.
Okay. Was it a transition for you to being a band leader as opposed to supporting? Like I guess skill or muscle it takes to do that?
I think I learned by observing. You know, playing in so many bands as a side person, you see what you like, what you don't like. You see how people are as leaders, and for me, I was played in bands of some really great band leaders. Yeah. So just watching how they did it and what I liked about it. So I think it felt for me pretty easy to take the things that I like. And of course it's trial and error. Yeah. You know, you mess things up. Yeah.
But it's always nice to learn from other people's mistakes.
Oh, totally.
If you can skip a few steps, it's like
absolutely.
And what makes, in your eyes, a good band leader?
Well, I think a good band leader treats the musicians with respect, values their time, is not overly controlling, but is clear. And that's something I've observed too, is you'll have a band leader that says, no, not that. I don't want that. But then with no follow-up, I do want this. Just kind of, no, it's not quite right. Yeah. You know, that kind of stuff to me isn't helpful. And I want the musicians in my band to enjoy playing. So I want to write things that'll give them freedom to express themselves and interpret. I want to try to be efficient. I want to try to pay them as well as I can, even if I lose money. I want to try to really respect and value their time. And I think, and to try to make it fun. Yeah. So I guess those are the things and I'm sure there are other things that will come to my mind. But those are the things I think about, you know, just to try to be clear in intent and focus without being controlling, really.
Do you have a preference over the recorded work or live performance?
I don't think so. I mean, to me, they're so different, and I really enjoy both. I really enjoy recording, and I love being in the studio, and I love trying to create a record. But for me, that's a very different thing than playing live. So, yeah, I can't say I really favor one over the other.
And do you have, like, a direction now for your career? What you want to do? How you want it to look? Well,
I feel very fortunate that I feel like I'm doing pretty close to exactly what I want to be doing, which is, you know, writing music, touring, performing, playing in other people's bands, leading my own bands. And that really is what I want to be doing. And just making sure that my music develops and grows. Yeah.
So from 2008, that's what you were sort of like, that's how I would like my career to look like. Were you thinking that then?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
And how do you feel like for your music to grow? Like, what does that look like for you?
To not write the same record over and over again. You know, and to try to make sure I keep trying out new things and new ideas. And to not worry too much what other people think, to just try to do what I want to do and what I'm excited about.
How do you keep that out when pretty much everything we do is online or seen?
Yeah, that's always slightly weird for me. I think I'm a naturally shy person, and I've never really enjoyed that kind of, you know, attention. I mean, really, I try to ignore it, honestly, as much as possible. I mean, I'm thankful for people listening to my music, but I try to not get caught up in, like, small details of what people might think about it or be saying about it. And I think partly that comes from the fact that I play music that isn't easy listening. So there's no way you can expect everyone's going to like your music. In fact, many people are going to dislike it. And I'm not aiming to make music to please everybody. Hopefully it would please some people. But I think I'm really just trying to, as best I can, create music that I believe in. And not worry too much about the consequences.
Yeah. And after you had did that, the 2000 year first as a band leader, was there a point where like you felt like you turned a corner with your career? Like there was a shift, like this is a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was a
break,
point.
Maybe.
I mean, maybe even when I did that record or when I started doing work as a leader, I felt like I started getting more opportunities for that. So it felt like there was a little shift, at least, from being a guitar player to being a band leader and a composer. Okay,
cool. And what are your plans now to keep expanding things? Or maybe more different directions? Like what directions do you want to move in next?
Well, the most recent project I've been working on is a quintet for voice, trumpet, guitar, bass, and drums. It's a band called Code Girl. And, you know, a lot of the music I listen to has lyrics and words, and I enjoy that. And most of the music I've written, not all of it, but most of it has been instrumental. And so I've always kind of thought, well, what would it be like to actually write lyrics and write songs? Not as a complete departure in direction, but just to see how that would change things. So that's what I did last year, basically, was write a whole bunch of lyrics and then write songs around them. And so I've written, I guess now I just mixed the record, a double record. And so that's kind of where my focus is now. I guess I hope to, once that record comes out, do some performing with that group and probably even write some more music for it.
And what was that like writing lyrics?
It was really cool, partly because I'm not a lyricist and I'm not a poet, although it's something I have dabbled with, you know, since I was in college. I'll write an occasional lyric and I enjoy creative writing. But I think there's some freedom when it's not something that is what you do. You know, I haven't studied it. I don't have all these shoulds and shouldn'ts in my head. It just feels like pure experimentation. And it really was for me, like different methods. I would just try. I didn't have like one approach to writing all of them. I would just really try different things and revise them. And for me, it was a really enjoyable creative process, also because it was new. You know, when you're doing a creative process that's new, it's going to just by default, I think, feel exciting. So that was really cool. And I have put lyrics to music quite a bit in the past, and that part I knew I enjoyed. Of just trying to form a song around the rhythm of a sentence or a word. That's something I knew I enjoyed. So yeah, it was exciting.
Is there a little fear or trepidation, like releasing something that's going to be not like your past stuff? With the lyrics? I
don't think so. You know, I have no idea how it'll be received, but I really like it and I'm excited about it. So, no, it's more for me just looking forward to being able to do shows and perform and do more stuff with that group.
Is there stuff that still kind of scares you as an artist? Like a little nervousness?
You mean like smaller things, like actually getting nervous in a situation?
Do you still feel that?
Sometimes. You know, like I said, I've never been a natural spotlight person. And performing has never come naturally to me. And I think I've had to work hard to feel comfortable. I mean, I still remember, like, as a teenager, just absolutely just horrible stage fright. You know, I remember, like, a guitar pick just slipping out of my hand because my hand was shaking so much. So, you know, most of the time now I don't feel nervous, but I think there is kind of that part of me is still, you know, I still have to work at that a little bit of the idea of being a performer.
And how is that, like, okay, for you when you're performing live and you're doing the improvisation, right? Like, do you have some sort of thread of an idea before that's based off the theme of the song?
Like if I'm doing an improvisation in the context
like
of a
for
particular
the solo
song.
One.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully for me, the written component of the song itself will provide some inspiration or even just the energy of the other musicians and what they're doing. But yeah, I try to hopefully take a somewhat different approach every time, but trying to honor the framework of the music and whatever the mood is or the ideas behind the piece.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay. And do you have to give the people you're working with like some sort of instruction in terms of their solos?
Usually not. I mean, I try to write pieces of music that are clear enough that people will kind of, and the people I work with are such amazing improvisers that I think part of what's exciting is just to completely trust them and that they're going to do something interesting in the moment. So I try to do minimal instructions. That being said, if there's something that I'm hearing that's just not happening, I'll absolutely say, this is the idea I had in mind. I can't think of a specific time now where that happened. But.
Yeah. How was that for you learning to improvise? Like, when did you learn that you're like, okay, I think I got this?
Well, I guess I still don't feel like that. But I remember the first time I did a free improvisation. I remember it well. It was a friend of mine at summer camp, some kind of music camp. I was probably in high school. And he said, let's just play. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And I remember that feeling of sitting down with this other guitar player and with no song, just playing. And I remember the excitement of that feeling. And for me at the time, that was a totally new idea because I'd never done that before. But I mean, I'm still always working on ways to expand my vocabulary as an improviser and expand all kinds of things that play into it, like, ear training, technique, anything so that, you want to get to a point where anything you're hearing can kind of effortlessly flow out of the guitar, which for me is kind of a big goal. And then also just doing a ton of listening, because there's so many different types of improvisation and so much you can do as an improviser. So I'm always trying to develop stuff and become a better guitar player and a better improviser.
Okay. What are some of the different types of improvisation?
Oh, I mean, I guess I meant just in terms of, well, not only in terms of genre. If you look at jazz and the way improvisation is used there, it's going to be slightly different than how it's used in Indian music. Or in, I mean, there's so many different musical traditions that have improvisation. Okay. But even within that, or if we're saying free improvisation, just saying that, there becomes stylistic things that are attached to that. But I like to try to avoid those. Or how can you bring in elements that aren't always in that type of improvisation into it? So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that must keep it exciting when you're going to perform because you never know exactly what's going to happen in that moment.
Well, that's a nice thing for me about music that has an improvised component is that you don't feel like you're playing the same thing every night. It really does. And you'll feel that when certain nights were really magical and certain nights maybe not so much. Yeah. And then that also depends on your perception. Like I might feel that a night was so-so and somebody else in the band might have loved it. And this happens all the time, so it's interesting how your perception can change.
Does a part of the improvisation also have to do with what you're getting back from the audience, too?
It can. I think the energy of an audience definitely affects things. I mean, you can have an audience that the feeling is so warm and like they're really listening and supporting you. And I think that kind of an energy can allow you to take more risks or feel more free. As opposed to an audience which might make you feel really self-conscious or, you feel like nobody likes it. That cannot be true. They could just be quietly listening. But, people, you can definitely get different energies from audiences. And, ideally this wouldn't affect you at all. And you would just go about performing exactly how you want to perform. But, I mean, there's always so many factors. Also the sound of the room.
Okay, yeah.
And I noticed this a lot. I did a bunch of solo guitar shows a few years ago. And if I walk into a room and set up and start playing and the sound of the room is perfect, that's going to make the solo show so much easier for me than if I'm battling against, the sound or anything. If it's too cold in the room or, again, you have an audience that you feel is weird or people are talking, that stuff totally affects it.
Are you able now at this point when you walk onto the stage to feel the room, kind of the energy of the room, like before you even start?
I think so. And I should say that even if I'm not feeling a great energy, I always try as hard as I possibly can. But I think I am sensitive to that, to the energy of a room or of the sound, because it varies so much. I mean, sound in rooms is an incredible thing. Just how a room can sound great or horrible with your exact same equipment. You know, it's interesting.
Okay. And it's fascinating how the audience is almost like this one unit, and that it varies from night to night. Because I've even seen like Madonna I've seen live. And I've seen her, people come there to pay, and like she has to like work harder for some audiences, and they're like, "Come on, you guys, scream!" So it's fascinating to me how that is. Like each audience, people who don't even know each other, are sort of working as one.
It's
unit.
true, and sometimes you almost have to separate it out. Like I remember, I was doing some solo shows when I first started playing solo, opening for Buzz Osborne from the Melvins. He was doing his solo project. So I was opening these shows, and some of the crowds were pretty raucous, and they certainly weren't there to see me. And so they were kind of like drinking beer and waiting for Buzzo. And for me to have to play through that was a great challenge, because half the people were talking, and then there'd be a bunch of people standing right in front listening. So you'd kind of have to zone out this sea of talking. And for me, I think that helped me develop an ability to really just focus on the people that were listening, to try to really play for them. And to not worry so much about all this noise that's going on. And that kind of stuff happens a lot, I think, where you have to kind of shut that stuff out at some point. But it was a great experience. It was really cool.
That's cool. And what are you looking for? So you got the vocal album someday soon? This year, next year? Probably
early next year. We have a bunch of shows lined up for March 2018, so it'll probably be released just before that.
Okay, cool. And rest of the year plans? You're touring a lot, right?
Yeah, I'm doing quite a bit of touring. I'm still doing quite a bit of stuff with my octet, which the record was released last year. And we're doing a week... Away With You, exactly. Yeah. We're doing a week at the Village Vanguard in July, which I'm really excited about. So I've written a bunch of new music for that, and trying to do as much stuff with that group as I can. And I'm trying to spend a little more time at home this year to just practice guitar, basically try to get better at guitar, and then a bunch of touring, and that's about it.
You have a daily practice?
I try to, but it's a little bit hard for it to be the same every day, because it's going to depend on what I'm working on. You know, like this week, for example, next week I'm going on tour with Tamika Reed's quartet. So I'm going to be working on her music. And then sometimes through that, I'll extract little things and turn those into exercises. But if I don't have any particular music that I need to be learning, I'll do a combination of composing and then just I'm in a back to the basics phase, so just working on expanding chord voicings and arpeggios and scales and ear training and things like that. So I've been enjoying really just sitting with that stuff.
And were you prepared for the attention that Away With You got?
No. I mean, it's funny, you put out records and you really don't know. You can't predict what the reaction was going to be. I mean, I'm very thankful for it. I really thought I would put out that record and maybe do a record release in New York, and that would probably be it. And just the fact that through that I've gotten opportunities to do more shows with, which for me is a very large group, 8 people. It's been really exciting.
It's cool. It's great to see that music, as you said, that may not be for everybody, is finding an audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah. And best place for people to keep up to date with you online with everything you're doing?
Probably my website, which I try to keep at least a month or two up to date with shows and things like that.
That's maryhalvorson.com.
I
will put that in the show notes. Cool. Did I leave anything out?
I don't think so.
Okay, then we're good. Thank you so much for doing this. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And I wish the best in everything you do.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Away With You, the title track from Mary's 2016 album, which you should own. So head on over to her website, maryhalvorson.com, HALVORSON. It was a pleasure to talk to her and to talk to someone who was so creative and amazing, a wonderful talent. I am online also, talkmusictalk.com, for podcast information, and you can also stream every episode of Talk Music Talk. I have a personal website, thisisboyce.com, where you can read excerpts from the novels that I write and check out the music that I make. And if you are on Instagram, please follow me there at thisisboyce. I have a call to action for you. Talk Music Talk has an app. You get every single episode. It is free for iPhone and Android, and you can get it wherever you like to get your apps generally. Or you can subscribe to Talk Music Talk on iTunes or Google Play. And if you are on iTunes, it is especially helpful to leave a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode or any other episodes you might have checked out or will check out. I appreciate it. Thank you in advance. You can also find the podcast on SoundCloud starting with episode 100. That's soundcloud.com/thisisboyce. And you can also find my music there at that link, soundcloud.com/thisisboyce. Once you download or subscribe to the podcast, don't forget, check out the other 2 jazz episodes. This block, this trio, 134 with Josiah Woodson and 136 with Amir ElSafar. And on both of those episodes, just like with Mary, you will hear music from the artist. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.